everyone. Welcome to Signals. I'm your host, Gwen Chen. Joining me is my friend, Bianca. She is VP of Marketing of Infios. Bianca has shaped narratives at SunTrust, Chase, and AWS, now at Infios. She's creating an entirely new category. Hey, Bianca, how are you today?
Hello, Gwen. So good to see you again. We had so much fun working together at AWS.
I'm so excited to see you, to be my guest here. Excited for this conversation. Your career, like I mentioned in the intros, and across different areas, including enterprise software, financial services, and customer experience, and now AI-driven supply chain execution. So maybe could you share what is the through line across your journey and what ultimately drove you to product marketing?
Yeah, so my degree is in communications. I actually intended to go into sports broadcasting. I love basketball and football, and I wanted to be the reporter on the sidelines. But I could not follow my passions because at the time when I graduated, it just was not there, right? Particularly for a woman of color. So I kind of just took the opportunities as they came to me, even if they didn't seem whatsoever aligned to what I had studied. I think the throughput in my career is just curiosity and a willingness to just jump into something when I know zero, like absolutely nothing. Guided by those two things, I have found myself learning so much that really, when, as Steve Jobs says, you can't connect the dots until you look back. But when I look back, every single role that I had, whether it was teaching kindergarten or it was setting up social media for the banking industry, it's, driven by a sense of curiosity, like what would happen if we did this? Even if there was no framework for it, no business model, no P&L, I just sort of jumped in and, that's the other. You have to be terrified to go into it. So curiosity and being terrified.
Mhm. Wow. To tell you, Bianca, that's one of the most popular keywords I've heard across all of my previous episodes. Um, just for the audience to be aware, if you want to be a marketer, you have to be curious, right? Especially for product marketing, you have to be comfortable learning about new technologies, and sometimes you could be put in a spot to create a new category. Now, Bianca, tell us, what does Infois do and what is your role there?
Yeah, so Infios is a newly formed brand from multiple companies. So we've had about 30 years in the supply chain execution space. And again, connecting the dots, looking backwards, when we look at our journey, we actually started building the components of what we call supply chain execution. So supply chain, if you just zoom all the way out, usually people think about it from a planning aspect, right? Using historical data to kind of predict and plan for what's coming next, right? And it kind of goes across the business. Supply chain execution for us is what happens when a moment of disruption hits. That could be global volatility like tariffs, natural disasters, climate changes, wildfires, consumer demand surges, things like that, right? So when you think about supply chain execution, I want you to think about it in three different spots. There's the life cycle of an order, right? A customer places the order. What they see generally is the delivery. That's the end of the life cycle. But included in that life cycle, you think about, once the customer places the order, it has to go to the fulfillment side of the business, right? Where are we actually going to get this product from? Then it goes to the warehouse to pick it and pack it. And then it goes to transportation, where a decision is made around how that delivery will actually occur. So for us, when we look at the core products that support that, it's order management, warehouse management, transportation management. And so when we looked at our history, we started building the blocks of this a long time ago. And we started with warehousing, and then we expanded, not just in features and capabilities, but geographies, right? Started serving globally. And then we brought the transportation piece in because, of course, once you pick something from the warehouse and you put it in a box, it's got to go out the door through a plane or a ship or a truck, right? And then we brought in the order piece because that was also missing, right? So now a business could actually manage all three of those on one platform. And what's really cool about the category that we're creating is we're not saying that there's anything in any way wrong with supply chain planning, but we are saying in the moment that a disruption hits and you need to be able to react in that exact moment, you can't wait even a couple of hours. You have to make a decision. What if you had, an entire ship with new merchandise headed to a distribution center and a wildfire occurred and it could no longer get to that distribution center, right? How do you reroute that and send it somewhere else that's still close enough to the location so those customers could still be served? So we're very excited when we think about supply chain execution and pulling that story together. And we sat down last year to really work on the vision and the strategy for that. And we knew that we didn't want to just provide products. We wanted to make them intelligent. We wanted to not just embed AI in it in the form of agents. We wanted to really look at how AI could bring in that intelligence and then get that insight, pull together decision recommendations, and then the human could act on those. And one of those things is we feel like in supply chain execution, you get a lot of context. And this is an enterprise problem, no matter what industry I've been in. You have millions upon billions upon trillions of data points, right? And sometimes companies are getting really good at using AI algorithms to do like predictive modeling and forecasting, et cetera, right? The machines are getting there. But when you think about that data, that's a lot of context. And in a moment of disruption, you cannot have something that's not real time and that's not accurate. So, how do you take that data, the context from that data, to make the right decision for your business so that after the disruptive event happens, you can still keep proceeding and going, hopefully with a little bit more competitive edge?
Yeah, very interesting. So traditionally, when we think of supply chain, it's usually connected to some of the keywords like operational. You also mentioned planning, right? And then invisible to some extent. So and until something breaks, right? And how did you frame as a head of product marketing as Invoice? How do you frame the story from being operational invisible to something else?
Yeah. So obviously, we use a lot of different talk tracks and narratives, and I can get into some of that when we start talking about enablement. But going back to this story, right, the life cycle of a single order, from the moment a customer clicks buy to the final delivery, that journey is crossing multiple systems. Multiple teams, there's multiple handoffs, there's multiple decision points, right? Every handoff, whether it goes from the order coming in to going to the warehouse to going to transportation to be delivered, there is risk there, right? There's delays, things could be misaligned, there could be manual intervention that kind of supersedes anything that you got in the system, right? So we look at it as that's the breaking point today, right? A lot of that stuff living in silos versus being aligned. And what we are doing is bringing that alignment to supply chain execution, right? We are getting ready to introduce something really exciting this year in terms of agentic AI and how that will actually work from a modular perspective, right? We're not going to try to lock you in on a platform, but it's really interesting to take a look at the workflows and take a look at where machines could come in and either augment what humans are doing, meaning they've been doing a ton of manual work. That reminds me so much of the Swimming Australia story from the Machine Learning Solutions Lab at AWS. So this was a team that every single swim meet, they would gather up data and they would write it down, the times and the pace and thousands of data points from one swim meet, right? And then they would go back to the office and a business analyst would enter it into Excel and they'd run formulas. And then they would use that to then kind of decide for a competition who would be, how the placement would work. And with the Machine Learning Solutions Lab, they were able to build this algorithm that did that automatically, right? So days, if not months, of data entry to insight to decision making got scrambled down to, like within minutes. And the story there is that they actually went to Tokyo. And instead of the coaches making their decision based on this paper output, the machine was recommending placement of certain athletes that they had not anticipated, and they won the gold. So I think that's such a realistic story for any enterprise, right? And that just showcases like a local perspective, but tons of data points. In the middle, you have to figure out how to use that context the data points give you, ways to make sense of it, and then make decisions based off of it, right? So I think one of the exciting things we're doing too is introducing like tangible ways that data capturing can be less manual. That's such a in product marketing, regular marketing, corp comms, you are going into a dashboard every single day to prepare your end of month.
Very cool.
What if you had one dashboard that just automatically that for you, right? That's been the like the promised holy grain, but yet here we are. We're still pulling metrics manually for web. We're still pulling metrics manually for campaigns. We're still pulling metrics manually for enablement, right? And then you have to build that story together, and it takes so much time, right? So we're hoping to within supply chain just sort of remove that friction point.
I like that you're connecting your industry with your work very closely, dealing with so many data and a
Yeah.
lot of context. And how do we think about how do we make the right decision at the right point, not just for the product you are supporting, but also for your work. So, want to tie back to what you mentioned just now, a new category. Creating a new category it's one of the most exciting project for product marketing, right? Instead of adding incremental value to something, you're doing something from scratch, brand new, huge impact. Can you share more about what's behind the scenes and what's broken in the old way of thinking and the working? Why do we need a new category?
Yeah. So when I joined Infios, I came in, I want to say, I've been here a year. I came in a year ago, and my manager is the EVP of product strategy and marketing. But across the ELT, our executive team, right, he was working really closely with our chief innovation officer and obviously others just to kind of form what that product vision and strategy was. When I came in, he was sorting through what the path forward would look like. And so we went to Palm Beach, where our CEO was at the time, locked a bunch of people into a conference room and said, "You're not leaving until we figure this out." So that requires a lot of finessing, especially from product marketing, having a seat at the table at a conversation that's critical to the company's growth. So you have to be really aware of what is the market saying, right? And the market is broken up into a few different things. First is what are the analysts saying about not only your category, but you as a product compared to your established, right? Your adjacent competitors, anything that's new. And then you have to understand what customers are saying, right? That usually comes in the form of like, peer reviews online, surveys, net promoter scores, etc. Then you also have to take a look at the product roadmaps themselves, right? And you have to align on what those like key themes are. And then you have to boil a lot of information from all of the different teams that are there. And you have to say, what's going to be our overarching message, right? So there's the brand architecture, right? For us, it's relentlessly making supply chains better. Very aspirational. It's beautiful to say, but then customers are like, what does that really mean? And so we landed on making supply chain execution intelligent, right? So we landed that new category. That's our vision, right? To make it intelligent. How we're going to actually make that happen is through connected execution. So that means connecting the products, right? In ways where it's really easy to grab insight and make decisions. And then finally, to talk about how do you actually do this? What's the product that actually does this? And what are the components of that product? So we sat there and we came up with our product vision and strategy and then started rolling it out to the organization. And it took a good few months to get it through because we're an amalgamation of a lot of different companies. So think that within each company that the team now comes from had their own independent marketing processes, their own governance, their own guardrails, their own ways of doing things, right? For campaigns or on the website, storytelling, for example. So when we sat down and introduced this new messaging construct, right, we were asking people to change the way that they think, right? We had a lot of sellers who have done things a certain way for a very long time. We started introducing new sellers who maybe didn't have as much domain expertise, right? But they had a passion for selling and they really understood AI overall. So, introducing a construct like that takes a lot of takes a lot of grit because you're going to have to power through multiple iterations, right? Like you might think, oh, I'm going to do this deck and this deck is going to nail it. Everybody's got to get it. And that didn't happen at all. And then at the same time, you have to think through from a product marketing perspective. How do you update the storytelling on the web page and, the timing for that? How do you enable not only sellers, but enable the marketing organization, across brand and growth marketing, demand gen, digital product marketing, right? How do you get them ready to start conveying this message in their deliverables? And then also you also have to align your executive teams because they're the ones that generally tend to be in front of like our top level of customers, right? So making sure that they had their playbooks and their talk tracks. So I think, when you think about product marketing having that seat, I mentioned, having a lot of data to inform that, but also just that perspective is really fresh in that room because they might not be as close to the data points as we are in marketing, right? In terms of the analyst feedback, customer feedback, prospect feedback, win-loss deal feedback, et cetera. So it's really important for product marketing to sit in there and to say, this is, here what customers think about this product versus they might think completely different about the next product, or the velocity of the next product might be way different, right? So it's important because product marketing is the nucleus of the organization for me. And so we bring to the table a rich amount of insights that can be used.
So for the new category, I'm curious to know, like, what is your sales enablement strategy?
Completely new strategy for the company, right? Before it was based on the traditional enablement structure, which is buy core products, right? And with product marketing, that comes with, product marketing doing the messaging and the positioning, right? Writing that wonderful 20-page document that has all of the information you'll ever need, doing, different forms of bill of materials, right? So like usually level 100, L100, you talk about pitch decks, you talk about sellers kits, right? Discovery frameworks, objection handling, persona scripts, right? And then you look at like the external content kits that's needed, right? A pitch deck for customers, a pitch deck for by business decision maker, by technical decision maker. On the website, you've got to have explainer videos and you've got to have product overviews and you got to have infographics and ebooks, et cetera. That's to me a very traditional product marketing sort of life cycle. What we aligned on with introducing AI into the supply chain space is really thinking about the buyers that we would be encountering and enabling the sellers on those buyers, right? And then the way that we enable the sellers still through live sessions, right? We'll have, workshops, et cetera, where they can practice fluency in a bunch of different ways to talk to customers. But at the same time, I think we sat down and looked at the overarching strategy for this year in product marketing. And a core priority was go-to-market activation, right? Teaching them how to tell and sell the story. But we had to make sure that there was a way that the field, our sellers, would be able to not only listen to the material, but adopt the material, right? Because their buy-in is so critical. So you really have to think through, and this is going to be different for each part of our product portfolio. But when you're introducing AI as a new topic, you really have to get everybody enabled on how to sell AI. There's a new lexicon, right? The language that you use is so different. There's different buyers, right? And whereas maybe you spent some time interacting with like the VP of IT, now you may be interacting with the head of cloud, the head of AI, your chief supply chain officer may be involved in these conversations, right? Because AI is so critical to most businesses. So we're looking at the enablement strategy by giving them clearer qualification paths. Right. And what that means is no matter the content, right, there's going to be guardrails introduced that says if a buyer says these things, yes, okay to proceed with the next conversation. But if they say these things, it's going to be a really long nurture cycle. So you have to think about how you would plan out that nurturing, right? Getting in front of their business decision makers and then getting in front of their technical decision makers and ultimately landing in front of the executives, right? So when you look at the story, when you introduce the story architecture, you really have to think about like, what does that message ladder look like? Because for someone who is a little bit unsure about AI, you wouldn't necessarily lead with a demo. You wouldn't even lead with a technical review, right? You'd really start in with like the vision, right? What would connected execution do for your business and really unearth the business problems that they would be trying to solve, that connected execution is a good fit for. But if you have someone who's more literate and has been in AI for some time now, the message ladder looks a little bit different. So we're getting clearer on our like qualification signals, the criteria there, and then mapping out those stories for different types of buyers, but also giving them a lot of intel for how to have these conversations because it's new for them. So there's going to be a lot of like scripts that are new. So, we are launching them right now and then we get feedback. We do a debrief. Like there was just a big event. And so we got a lot of feedback from the buyers that were at that event, right? That included our customers, but also prospective customers. How did you land that conversation with them? And so we were able to pick up on like, their eyes glazed over when we said this, but they got very excited when we said this, right? And so it's a constant tweaking, but I think you really have to look at the story architecture. You have to look at how the messages ladder, and you have to give them like talk tracks and narratives, right? Stories that are meaningful. And it's not just one story, right? There's the order life cycle. There's what happens when a truck is late, the journey of, a sneaker from, being created all the way to ended up in a store, right? So giving them those like realistic examples and then showing them the ways that the technology factors into it.
Yeah, sales enablement definitely huge in product marketing. We talked about sales enablement, talk about messaging. Are there any other major areas you think are critical to this launch?
For me, it goes back to something that a CEO had told me a long time ago. This was in Florida. She just launched a new supermarket. And in the Southeast region, Publix is the main supermarket, right? You go there for your cakes, your sandwiches. Like, if you don't buy a cake from Publix, you're like banned from the workplace, right? So she had launched this new supermarket, and we were talking. The supermarket had come to our Charter One school to help us paint the cafeteria for the kids. And so we got to talking, and I said to her, how are you feeling with knowing that, Publix is looking at everything that you're doing, your media interviews, et cetera. And she told me something that has stuck with me forever. It doesn't matter what my competition thinks if my internal teams have no idea what we're doing. So I've taken that lesson with me every company I've been to, which is the organization has to buy in first. Because if we don't believe what we're selling, we have no way of being credible with our customers and our prospects when we tell the story, right? So my job in product marketing and my team's job is to make this product real and to give them the stories that make the products real, break it down by personas, by industries, proof points as we, beta the agents with customers. What are customers saying? What did it look like to take it to production? How many people did they think that they needed versus what they actually ended up needing? What could have made the experience smoother for them? What impacts are they seeing? So, our job is like laddering the story first and then, bringing it home with these proof points that, hey, this actually really did work really well for this customer.
So the writing the customer stories, a big component as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And we have to start from scratch. We were building the plane as we flew it last year. So we were building, not just the vision and the strategy, we were building what we were bringing to market, building, the infrastructure and working with partners like the AWS Generative AI Innovation Center to build a proof of concept, right? That we could put into production. So that's the thing about technology now. You can move so much faster with it if the organization is nimble enough. But when there's a lot of roadblocks, things will get stuck, decisions will get stuck in silos or different business units. But if you have an organization that's nimble and willing to essentially kind of throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, you could move really, really fast.
So for this vision, I remember you shared previously, like agentic work is core to this vision, right?
Yeah.
You have a real world example, like from what you mentioned, the inventory warehouse to packaging to transportation, and where do agents operate, and then where do humans step in?
Yeah, so our vision is going to be delivered through a few different ways, right? The first is AI agents because we want to take advantage of what's happening in generative AI. Of course, there's machine learning in there, right? We have certain use cases that we're looking at. I think number one across any industry is IDP IDP or intelligent document processing, making sense of millions of PDFs on your knowledge management systems like the intranet, right? Workflow orchestration is another key one that we're looking at. So, for example, let's say you're setting up a new order management system and you have different roles within that. Well, generally, a lot of these things have to be customized because of the industry, because of the tiers of the customers they serve, the geographies that they serve, right? So it's very customizable, but it's also from an implementation perspective, it takes months to get it right. And then hopefully if you set it up for one role, it's wash, rinse, and repeat. But sometimes even that needs to be customized, right? So what we're doing is introducing agents in there that would basically reduce that timeline from months to days. And so setting them up as skills, if you will. So you've got order management, you've got different roles in there. You set up out of the box onboarding configuration that they can customize, right? And keep that going. And as the role changes, right? Maybe sometimes some, access needs to be restricted, something it needs to be expanded, keeping those guardrails in mind as well, right? The other ways that we're looking at it is really like just integration across the different products, right? How many times have you gone to multiple systems to pull together? As we talked about before, pulling together your marketing monthly report, you have to go to multiple systems to get that, right? So, what if we made that workflow integration a lot easier?
Yeah. Wow. From months to days. That's amazing. So I want to come back to the broader industry supply chain. When you introduce this new category and new story and new way of working, how did it feel like? Do you still remember? Like, I would imagine there might be a lot of pushbacks, and you hinted earlier in your response as well. Can you share? Like how did
Yeah.
you lead the charge and then make this a reality?
Yeah, change management is so core. That's the guiding principle. Understanding how people feel about the existing process and mapping out ways they will potentially feel, react, or do with the new introductions, right? So that really anchors on stories, right? What we wanted to do. There's been so many advancements in technology, and I'm not saying supply chain has not taken advantage of this, they have. But I think today, still, even if an enterprise company has put together their tech stack, right, it still remains a little bit reactive and fragmented. So you think about what that means. Sometimes it's no connectivity, limited connectivity between the solutions that they're using. Humans are manually moving work, right? Decisions are still being made manually, right? Trying to pull data from multiple sources, right? And so the old world is still a little bit slow, costly, and it's reactive, right? And what we're doing by introducing intelligent supply chain execution through a connected portfolio is that now you have an intelligence layer that sits above your products, right? Your tech stack, if you will, and it orchestrates the work. And while it's orchestrating the work, it's learning continuously, right? So that it gets better each time. And then humans come in at the point where there's an exception or a decision to be made, right? So now you're starting to move much more faster, much more efficiently, and you start to get a little bit more predictive in your decision. So that's one of the top, that's like the overarching story that we're talking about, right? Moving from a fragmented world to a world that's real time and synchronized. And this is not a new story. Enterprises have been telling and selling this for a very long time. But that's the power of generative AI. That's what it's really introduced, is the ability to go past a lot of the bottlenecks, right? And get to the core of the problem that you're trying to solve. So for us, when we look at our customers and we look at the products that they're using, we've started building agents based on the things that cause them the most angst, right? And as I mentioned, it could be different by product, right? For one product, it's about onboarding, reducing time from months to days. For another one, it could be there's these particular workflows that require humans to check in while driving the truck. Well, what happens if there's no signal where they are? How do you manage that and still maintain that the truck, still maintain that the truck will be there as the time of delivery, right? In the warehouse, right? Pick and pack. This is Amazon's sweet spot. And by the way, I visited a fulfillment center and absolutely fell in love with the four walls of the warehouse. But think about how many decisions and the amount of people, and even with robots, right? It's still It's still not like a perfect world, but like how do you have the humans and the machines working together essentially? So I think when you think about it, going back to that customer order, right? You have to look at where things break down for your customers and introduce use cases that make sense for them.
We talked about this new category. We talked about sales enablement. Now I want to like talk about your elevator pitch. Like remember when we were doing the messaging framework, we have tagline, elevator page, and the messaging framework, messaging pillars, right? So in your own words, like how would you describe this new launch?
I think the elevator pitch to a person who's in AI is that it's embedded execution intelligence. They're going to get it. They're going to understand right away. The data layers are going to connect, going to talk to each other, understand the context, make the recommendations for the decision, and you either enable the agent to make the decision or a human has to come in, right? For the customer that's a little bit unsure, the story is different, right? We have to talk about that limited connectivity between solutions, and that they've invested a lot of time and effort into putting together point solutions for their business. Right? It's not just one vendor. It's not just one partner that's going to work for you. They've pulled in the components from different companies that make their business operate, but also move as quickly as they can when a moment of disruption hits, right? But sometimes when that moment of disruption hits, you realize, hey, I am not ready for this. That's exactly what happened during COVID. Companies who had not invested in microservices quickly learned that they were going to be left behind in the race. What customers really needed to know is that product available at this store that's less than 3 miles away from me, right? And so you saw that movement, right? Things started changing. So for the customer who is really unsure about AI and maybe thinking that AI will replace humans, we approach the story and the elevator pitch completely different than we would with somebody who's more attuned to how AI has impacted things. So that story would really be like, here's sort of like the old world, your current view, and here's the new world, and here's the things that you could gain.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about AI and the impact of AI on marketing. So, in your mind, in the next few years, what are the changes AI will bring to marketing? That's my favorite topic for all of my guests. What do you think the success will look like for marketing in the future?
Yeah, so I think right now we're in that wonky gray stuff of figuring out AI tools. We've seen that people reading posts on LinkedIn can tell when something is AI generated versus a human writing it, right? So I think right now we're in that spot of figuring out how AI tools can improve our productivity. So, like for my team and I, we have guardrails, right? We're not going to be writing blogs that are AI generated, but we could say, hey, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, here's the abstract of what I'm wanting to write. Here's the audience looking to generate an outline. And then when you're writing a blog, you're still including, the ways that you've traditionally done research, right? Analyst reports, industry benchmarks, that human angle, right? But maybe you're using AI to help generate the outline of what that could look like. You could use AI to critique the impact of one headline over another, right? So instead of having to do like A/B testing, right, online, you'd be able to do it through as the models get better and better, you'd be able to do it there. I think AI is going to still cut a lot of the manual processes, especially in marketing. Ideation and brainstorm is one key area, but I also think from a reporting side, it will help us become more accountable for what we're delivering, right? Because now we're really literally have an AI agent as our colleague, right? And so you quickly figure out ways. There are people who will figure out ways to game the system, but I'm hoping to see marketers use AI to be even more creative and also to test their judgment and discernment. I think, human judgment is probably going to be such a critical skill in the future, right? I have a friend whose daughter is an artist and she is considering studying graphic design, but she's like, if AI could create all of this, like, what's my role in the future? And so I was thinking about that and I told her, I said, I think your judgment and your discernment that means something to people, right, is going to be so critical. A machine can obviously do something very cute and quick and generate a response like very, very rapidly. Think about those moments in your life where a piece of art, whether it's like an actual artwork or it's lyrics in a music or, this experience, right? Like Apple just did that commercial from the Bad Bunny halftime show showing the impact of how the audience perceived it across the world. A machine could not do that, I don't think. It's a human sitting there and being like, yes, this person in Brazil was watching it the way that this person in Puerto Rico was watching it, right? So you think about that, I think human judgment, human discernment thing, again, our brains are hardwired for curiosity. It's hardwired for continuous learning. We're doing it all the time. No matter who you are, whether you're in tech, not in tech, you're curious and you're always learning something new. And so I think that's where humans are going to continue to live atop the intelligence layers.
Coexist and
Yes.
use AI as an productivity amplifier and push us to a
Yeah.
higher level of creativity.
Yes. I think so. I've been more productive with, using GPTs, right? Just doing that A/B testing, right? It's been really helpful to me, someone who's very direct and blunt to write better emails for different audiences, right? It's just enhanced my curiosity in the terms of like before I would spend a lot of time trying to figure out I'd have a ton of notes, right? I'd have like ideas, but putting that into an outline to write an ebook or to write a blog series, right? Took a lot of time because I had to think about the structure and then duplicate it across the content type. And GPTs makes that so much easier for me.
Yeah, I agree. So is that the reason why you are intentionally keep your team so small?
Not really. I expect that we'll have definitely some room where AI will augment processes that we have. The reason I'm keeping my team small right now is because our product portfolio is small. So we've got a ton of subject matter expertise. We want to make sure that that's shared across the team so that they can become informed. But also, keeping the team small also keeps the vibe going. When you start launching into teams of like 20, 30, 50 people, things get diluted a lot. So, right now, they're on the ride of building a new brand, building a new messaging architecture, right? Vision, strategy, what that messaging looks like for the products. They're looking at how the message ladders work for different buyers. They're participating in enablement sessions, delivering feedback, getting feedback in real time. They're working across the organization, our demand gen teams, our digital teams, our brand teams. And so for right now, we're really running really smoothly. We'll add as talent comes across. But for me, I like to hire really smart people and just sit out of their way. That's new for me. I'm used to kind of designing the process and then driving the process. And now I have to take a step back and let them design the process, right? And then I come in and drive the process as they need me to, right? So it's a different team model and dynamic that I'm working with.
So is there anything else you want to share about your product, your vision of leading product marketing in the whole supply chain category?
Yeah, something I've been working with my team on is being a point of friction in a meaningful way. It's not a role people are comfortable with at all. They tend to think that it's like confrontational, and it's not. It's introducing perspectives that are backed by data points, right? And going back to that Amazon principle, you can disagree and commit, but it's still important for you to say, I really think we should go in on this direction because of these 3 data points. That's what the data is telling us the next step, the path forward should be. So I'm working with the team on that. What's really cool is I'm getting to enjoy developing them as leaders and working with their individual personalities. There are some that are very laid back. There are some that are very gung ho. So figuring out how to introduce those points of friction into a conversation in a meaningful way. And the ways that you would do this with your peers are different than you would do this with an executive, right? So just getting to work with them. But I think, I'm teaching my team to embrace friction as a way to grow instead of, oh my God, I gave them a dissenting opinion and everybody hated it. Well, the data told you what that opinion was, right? So, yeah.
Very much needed in a company that you have to introduce a new category, right? You have to be comfortable of change, be comfortable of the frictions, right?
Yes. You always have to be. And I find just as humans, change is I don't know. For a person like me, I always have a checklist that's running in my head. So when a change is introduced, I break it into tasks immediately, right? And my brain just wants to check it off. And other people look at it from like, this is going to disrupt my routine, my process, my workflow. So I'm learning that I have to be conscious of the ways that people process change, which is I mentioned change management is so critical when you've got new messaging. I have to be really conscious of the ways that people react to new messaging and that the initial maybe I gave them 2 or 3 stories and none of those stories resonated with them, right? So now here's an opportunity to add in a story for them so that they feel seen and they feel like their opinion or their perspective is weighted into the story now. Those are my points as a leader right now. It's the really being conscious of the change management and how people's perspectives are really different. And then also introducing friction in the right way as much as possible. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I am from New York City, but I'm working on it.
Okay. All right. It was so fun connecting with you,
Gwen.
Bianca. Thank you so much for explaining how you are, introducing this new category and writing the story,
Yes.
introducing, bringing a change to the new place. And I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gwen.